got a really great response to the video I did earlier this week about Ghislaine Maxwell allegedly appearing at the In-N-Out Burger in Los Angeles. Now, a lot of people sent me messages and left comments on that video, and most people seemed to really get a lot out of it. They liked seeing the in-depth analysis of how and where certain specific Photoshop techniques were used. But then there were other people who seemed to not quite get what the purpose of the video was. The video was not saying that there wasn't Photoshop. There's a lot of people who either didn't watch the video, didn't understand the video, or just flat out wanted to put comments in there to confuse people. Now, that happens a lot. It's called social engineering. If that's a term that you're not familiar with, you might want to look it up, familiarize yourself with it. It's something that I talk about quite a bit. I didn't know about it at all until I started my YouTube show, but there's a lot of people that want to use social engineering to deceive us, and the purpose of the video I did the other day was to sort of pose the question, is this entire Ghislaine Maxwell at the In-N-Out Burger a giant social engineering transmedia PR campaign? And it's not a question so much of if Photoshop manipulation was used, it's a matter of what other manipulations are there. I also spoke about steganography in the last show, and a lot of people, particularly computer-oriented people, thought I was talking about messages encoded in the actual photographs. And while that's possible, steganography is just referring to the concept of encoding a message in any kind of plain sight communication. So everything that was being put into the newspaper, put out on 4chan, is potentially a social engineering effort. Now, one of the most interesting things that happened as a result of the show is that I got a lot of feedback from viewers, and that is the purpose of Crowdsource the Truth. I don't show up here purporting to know everything. I'm asking questions like everybody else, and we're getting some really interesting answers. Now, one of the first things that happened is a viewer sent me these images from the New York Post content management system. Now, I don't know how the person got that. I don't know if that's a publicly available thing. I don't know if that person somehow figured out how to get into it, if they work for the New York Post, whatever. I didn't take it, somebody emailed it to me, but it's revealed a number of interesting things. I have much higher resolution versions of some of the images we were looking at last time, including this one, which I had presumed was taken with a smartphone because of some of the sharpening artifacts that we saw. But of course, sharpening can be applied to the image after it's taken. The person who sent me these also sent EXIF data, which is metadata embedded in the photograph that tells us that this was taken with a Canon, what was it, SX530 camera. We spoke about it on Dr. Corsi's Prescription for America. People can tune into patreon.com/Jerome Corsi or patreon.com/Crowdsource the Truth to see that episode. But basically, we determined that these images were all taken by a more sophisticated camera than what would be in your mobile phone. And we see that there is no sharpening artifacts here, or at least they're not as prominent if they are there. Tools like Adobe Photoshop allow you to apply filters that can create sharpening, and we'll start to see some of those artifacts as you turn this up too high. You'll start to see some of these artifacts come through on the edges there. And I'm not really able to recreate what we saw necessarily, so that's interesting. We'd have to mess with that a bit more to get that result. But there are other things in these images that we didn't quite discuss. So a lot of people are convinced that this Good Boys poster was photoshopped in there. I'm not convinced of that, but we can explore both sides of that argument. The first thing that I had presumed was that it was actually there, and perhaps there's a rotating mechanism that switches the ads. So another Crowdsource the Truth viewer who lives in the area went over to visit the In-N-Out Burger and snapped some photos with their iPhone for us. And this gives us some more information about the location. Interesting to note that this ER poster, which is not, I don't think, a hospital ad, it's saying best new ER, maybe it is a hospital ad, but it's a play on the fact that this is Hollywood and almost every ad is for a TV show or a movie. So they're saying that their hospital is up for some kind of award or, you know, for your consideration. It's a joke. But it does seem that this ER ad is there, and the person who took these pictures went and scrutinized that bus shelter quite closely and determined that there is no mechanism in it for rotating the ads. The ads remain stationary, and this ER ad was there. So that does seem like stronger evidence that either someone photoshopped the Good Boys image in there or someone physically changed the poster. So changing the poster, we could imagine someone either has the key or gets the key or breaks the key and puts a Good Boys poster in there specifically for this photograph. I don't think that poster for Good Boys would have been there much before this photo was released in the newspaper, because it's a new movie, and movie ads in Los Angeles, they rotate pretty quickly because there's always new movies coming out. So, all right, let's presume that this was photoshopped in there, and that was something I was questioning last time, because it seemed like it would require a much higher level of sophistication in Photoshop than what we've observed elsewhere in this series of photographs. There is somebody who has now demonstrated changing this with Photoshop, and they got an image of a car and reflected it in the window, and it certainly could be done. But this, if it is photo editing, is done with so much more sophistication than any of the other Photoshop elements that we've seen, or I should say most of the other Photoshop elements that we've seen, that it just doesn't stand to reason that we would have this mix of high quality Photoshop editing and low quality Photoshop editing. Now obviously this image has been manipulated, maybe by the New York Post, to eliminate these faces, to eliminate or at least reduce the Maxwells, family owned since 1949. That might be the type of thing you would do to run this image in the newspaper, but then again, the picture that ran in the New York Post was cropped, and it didn't seem to show that Maxwell's restaurant sign, so why would they bother to tile it out in that other image? There's a lot of unanswered questions. What I would really like would be the original camera photos, you know, before they went to the New York Post, but it does seem like those were created by Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer and were very unlikely to get those photos. Now, the other element of potentially sophisticated Photoshop editing is Ghislaine Maxwell herself. Now, this image that I've got in Photoshop, it was handled by the New York Post, so maybe they've got one Photoshop artist who puts ads for movies in there, and another Photoshop artist who crudely paints out signs that they don't want appearing in the New York Post. But we've got this picture of Ghislaine Maxwell's face, and to me, she just looks much younger than a woman of 57. She also looks younger than she herself is depicted in this other photo. So what's happening here? Is this just a matter of taking off her glasses, sticking out her chin and smiling a little bit, and that makes her look 30 years younger? Or is there some Photoshop going on? It's very hard to tell. I looked at this quite closely, and particularly this newer, higher resolution image, and there are no obvious telltale signs. We might be seeing some brush strokes right here. It's difficult to say. Can't really tell. So what I wanted to do was I put together a little test. I downloaded an image of Demi Moore from her you know, when she was in Ghost, she was younger. That was 1990 or something like that. So I just went in here and I searched for an image of Demi Moore. Just the images, and I always like to go for the large-sized images. So we searched through here for an image of Demi Moore, one where she is kind of facing right towards the camera. That looks like a good one. You just bring that into Photoshop. Okay. So now we can just basically cut Demi Moore's head out and try and scale it down to be the right size to fit over Ghislaine Maxwell. I chose Demi Moore because they have a similar hair color, sort of a similarly shaped face. And then we can just adjust the size here, reduce the opacity so I can see both faces. I'm trying to line up the eyes, the nose, the lips, and this works better with certain people than it does with others. Obviously, if we had a picture of Ghislaine Maxwell when she was 30 and overlaid it over her own face when she was 50, this would work even better. But let's just see how easily we can map this on there and make it look like Demi Moore is having a hamburger. So right now it's not quite making it, but there's a bunch of things that we can do. Let's smooth out the edges first and get rid of the excess that we don't need. And I don't want this to be a Photoshop tutorial necessarily, but I want people to see how this type of thing can be done. And it's not to say that I'm the biggest Photoshop expert in the world, but this is just, one approach that could be done. The most important thing, of course, is matching up the position of the person's face, the direction they're looking in. And like I said, if we had a photo, or if you were Ghislaine Maxwell and had a photo of yourself from 30 years ago, you could have it there with you and take several pictures to match the pose and do your best effort to sort of match it up, knowing that you were going to do this. So what I'm doing now is I'm erasing the portions of the face that would be covered by her hand if it were resting up against her face like that. And this reminds me of another point that was brought to my attention. The jewelry that Ghislaine Maxwell is wearing could itself be sending us some kind of a signal. Just kind of going around here and erasing the portions of Demi Moore's face that are covering up Ghislaine's hair. We're going to blend their skin tone together a little bit at the end here. So I just, there's certain cues that are going to make it very convincing. The hair in front of her eyebrows and things like that, the hair in front of her forehead. We don't want this to look like just a oval picture cut out of Demi Moore and placed over Ghislaine Maxwell, but we can already see that's starting to look like just a person sitting there. We can adjust the brightness. That doesn't look like the right way to go. That's the gamma. Let's just take down the white point a little bit. Just getting it closer. Matching the shadows would be another important thing to do so the tonality is off. We can just pick up the color of Ghislaine and overlay that over Ms. Moore. And let's just apply that not as a normal paint stroke, but we just want the color from those paint strokes. I didn't do a good job of erasing all the pixels in Demi Moore's face here. So just go back and clean this up a little bit. I know this looks like a mess right now, but it's gonna work, I think, trust me. This is, again, just an example of how something like this could be done. And this is not necessarily the best. Someone could have spent hours working on this. Someone could have used more sophisticated techniques than this. But this is, okay, so now we've got the color kind of matching. That's not bad, right? But then when we zoom in, we're going to notice that there's a grain to the photography of Ghislaine Maxwell that doesn't necessarily match the photograph of Demi Moore. We can add some noise to the image of Demi Moore. It's maybe a little bit too much You dial this in, take it down a little bit. It's wrong direction. Just a subtle, you know, and then we can kind of soften that noise a little bit with a blur. Oop, not so much. Let's take that down to maybe even a little less than that. So we can tweak it. We're getting closer here, you know. Let's give it 0.25, 0.2. Just a very slight blur to that noise. It's already making it harder to tell if this has been added or if this was part of the original photography. We've now got grain there on the image of Demi Moore. I mean, you know, the lighting doesn't exactly match, but I think a lot of people would see that and you could say, hey, Demi Moore was eating hamburgers, reading CIA books, and it's not immediately obvious that that was photoshopped in there. Now, I'm not trying to say that's like the best Photoshop work ever, but it's certainly less obvious than the smearing around that we saw in that image of the side view. I want to spend some time looking at that image now, and that image becomes more important because there were a lot of people who watched the first video and sort of made comments along the lines of, oh, you know, the image was photoshopped, Jason doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't know who could have watched that first video and come away thinking that I didn't believe it was photoshopped. I thought we covered that quite extensively. What I wanted to try to understand is, why was it photoshopped? How was it photoshopped? And what is the purpose of this whole entire exercise? It seems very odd to me that somebody who is potentially wanted by the authorities and has blackmail material on some of the most powerful people in the world, it seems like that type of person would be quite concerned for their safety and wouldn't be going out in public to hamburger restaurants making social media posts or sending images to major newspapers. So the viewer who went over to In-N-Out Burger took some more pictures of the table where Maxwell was seated, and this was quite educational, actually very important. I think there's things that we can discover from these images. Now, this was a different time of day than when the Maxwell photo was taken. And we can tell because, you know, the shadows are sort of coming towards the camera here. If people look, you can see very, very sharp shadows, so it was not overcast at all, and clearly defined shadows here. We did not have that type of weather on the day that Ms. Maxwell was at the hamburger restaurant. We can see actually very diffuse shadows seem to be falling towards, well, certainly almost straight down. We can see right here in some of the earlier photos taken, if they were taken that day, it looks like the shadows are falling sort of towards the camera this way. We don't know how much time transpired between the taking of these photos, but the sun seems to be behind Ghislaine Maxwell, and those shadows are not as apparent in this image. They seem to be falling towards the camera. This looks like a shadow to me right here. Perhaps it's a reflection in the bricks, but they don't seem that reflective. Looks like the shadows are sort of falling straight down, and I'm drawn once again to this car. This looks like an Audi to me, and it just appears to be parked so close to this brick wall here. I'm very interested in the relationship of the brick wall to the table Ghislaine Maxwell is eating at. We know that there's a garbage can here that's been photoshopped out, but why? Why would someone remove the garbage can? Who cares if there's a garbage can there? You know, this does not seem like a photo that's come from the lawyer's camera, but then again, we don't know. It could be, and heavily decimated. The tray that was present is gone. We've discussed that before. But I'm going to come right out and say I think that this car was added. I don't see a reflection of these cups I don't see these two cups reflecting in there. I had speculated previously that this might be a reflection of this pole, but I think we would see the cups reflecting if we saw this pole reflecting, and we don't. And this looks very much to me like the tire of a truck. Perhaps this is like the white truck part of a truck, and this is the tire. That looks like the reflection of a tire to me. And certainly taking a picture of a car in a parking lot and getting the reflection of a tire in it seems like something that would happen. I'm not sure that we're seeing the reflection of the Hamburger restaurant here. I could be wrong. If people disagree with me, by all means weigh in, but there's some strange things happening underneath the car as well. This looks like a very hard edge, and it looks just unnaturally close to this bench. This seems to be inserted. This doesn't, from a three-dimensional standpoint, the spatial relationship between this bench and this car looks very unnatural. I would also point out that whether this is a smartphone or the lawyer's more sophisticated camera, we've got a lot of depth of field here, as we were talking about, very deep focus. Everything from Ms. Maxwell to this buy-sell trade sign in the background is in sharp focus. So it seems odd to me that we have this blurring along the bench. Certainly the end of this bench is closer to camera than that sign all the way over there. So I don't understand how we could have this selective blurring if it wasn't for someone coming in here and doing something to this bench. You'll also notice that the curve of the bench does not look natural. And when we compare that to this other image that we have of the bench, you can kind of see what I mean. The focus throughout the curvature of that bench remains sharp. And let me see if I can line these up size-wise. And the bench that we're looking at in the photograph provided by 4chan or whoever provided this, it doesn't look the same to me. It looks quite different, in fact. It looks like this may be another spot where Photoshop has been used. The other thing I think that we want to notice is that this brick wall behind Ms. Maxwell is an element that may have been manipulated as well. What I'm getting at is if someone was, let's say, sitting right across here from Ms. Maxwell where this car is, perhaps the lawyer, there might be a desire to remove that person from the photo, and placing this car there would do it. However, if the garbage can were present, as it seems to be at In-N-Out Burger, that might have made it so that the effect that they're trying to sell, the visual illusion, perhaps wouldn't work. We need to remember in Photoshop we're looking at two-dimensional representations of a three-dimensional world, and perhaps the fact that this car is not there became much more obvious when the original wall was here. What seems to have been done is that the wall has been replaced. We spoke in the last video about how the clone tool seems to have been used to create this unnatural brick wall pattern, and then there's just a giant smudge where the garbage can was, and that whole mess seems to coincide with the front of this car. We don't know what elements were being used, but I got a lot of issues with this car. It looks like the car is parked on top of this part of the bench, and it also looks like the bottom of the car goes up just a little bit, right where it would intersect with that bench. So I don't know, that seems like that might be some sloppy photoshopping. Someone may have inserted a bit of brick here, or perhaps that was naturally there, but there are some strange things going on with this bench here. It looks like this is maybe, you know, again, some illustration going on with the bench. Is this a smooth curve on that bench? Let's examine that bench more closely. I think that bench looks pretty smooth and even. You know, I think what we might want to do, let's see if we can bring this image into Photoshop. All right, so what we could do with this is, if we just take this, let's back up a little bit here. We're gonna do a little something here. So this is much, much higher resolution. See, that's another thing. Why are people always posting such low resolution versions of these images? We could have much higher resolution source material, which would make this easier to do. But let's see if we can't make this bench about the same size and do some critical comparison here. This is a little tricky. All right, that looks like it's getting close. Ooh, good job lining up the camera angle there. That's very, very close. Okay, so now we can evaluate certain things about this bench. Okay. Ooh. How do we like the look of that edge? Does that look like it's been touched up a bit? Maybe. Now the camera's at a different angle in the image that we've got than the image that Ms. Maxwell has, but something about this bench disturbed me earlier. Her leg, just right here, it just looks like something's been edited here. This looks like 1 pixel little divot right here in the edge of the bottom edge of that bench. I don't know. Hard to say. But I was really intrigued by the number of people who said that this has been debunked, stop looking at it, this is last week's news. I'm far less interested in breaking news than I am in analyzing things that seem unanswered. This is one of those things. Now, another thing that I haven't heard anybody speak about is this says copyright Mega. Now, who's Mega, and why is there a copyright on this? Who's got the original photo? Does anybody know this Mega person? Is that a 4chan user? I mean, this is a really bizarre and complicated mystery, because how did all these photos get out into the world? If this photo, profile photo, if this is showing something that Maxwell or her attorney doesn't want seen, how did it get edited before it made it out into the public? If this was just a casual diner snapping a picture, wouldn't they release it with Maxwell's lawyer there? The other thing I wanted to show people with regard to this Audi being parked there is just the area outside the restaurant in general. This is not a normal parking space. In fact, it's someplace that if you parked there, it would probably become an issue quite quickly, because that's the only way that people can get in and out of the, pardon the pun, that's the only way people can get in and out of the parking lot. The other thing that we want to take note of is the height of this wall relative to the garbage can. It looks like it could be the same as the original doctored photo, but again, perhaps this Photoshop manipulation is designed to prevent people from making comparisons like that. It looks like the top edge of this wall lines up with the bottom of the garbage can, and I think we would notice even a slight discrepancy if we had a full image of the garbage can there, but of course we don't, because it's been photoshopped out. So I don't know, people can make their own decision if the wall behind Ms. Maxwell looks the same as the actual wall, or does it look perhaps not the correct height? Hard to say. A lot of people have raised a question about, is there motion blur added around her hands? Well, this definitely looks like a hard edge right here. That would be consistent with adding in this wall. again, this is very low resolution. There could be sharpening artifacts happening. This white edge, I don't know why people add that white edge, but that's what we saw in Barack Obama's birth certificate around the letters that have been added, so that's quite interesting. But anything around this wall would potentially be edited or added or manipulated in some way. And remember, people have access to this In-N-Out Burger table. It's just out there in Universal City. Anybody could go over there and get some source imagery for a Photoshop edit that they might be planning. So let's just look at some more things from this area outside the In-N-Out Burger. So here's the space that the car is parked in. Now, any one of these people trying to pull out or anybody trying to drive in to the restaurant might be quite irritated by a car being parked right there. It looks like there's enough room for it, but I don't know if that's really where people are parking. I mean, you might want to stand there. With a car here, when we see this car here, it looks like there's maybe not enough room for anybody to get in or out. So the concept that the car would be totally blocking the entire parking lot of In-N-Out Burger, someone might park there. Here's a car driving in. There's another image of a car driving in that the photographer took to show us. So here we see a car occupying that space. Now this is a very useful photograph because we can see a lot of characteristics so here's the wall, here's the car. It's hard to say if the pole would reflect in the car because we're not standing at the same angle and it's not the same car. But I think people are getting an idea for what the spatial relationship of a car parked pretty close to this wall looks like. And for me, when you compare it to this car, it does not look like a natural position. This looks like a car that's been inserted. So I don't know if that's enough examination of that for people, but keep in mind that the edges of everything here, the very smooth edge of a table, those are pretty easy to integrate in terms of editing the photos. It's interesting to note that this edge of the cup looks quite straight. I think everybody knows these cups are normally, they got this kind of angle here. Let's see. Why is that not cooperating? I think we would expect to see an angled edge of the cup. Something maybe like that might look more normal. That's odd to me. Someone could have done something like this. Again, anytime somebody decides to edit an image, it can go a variety of ways depending on how much detail they want there. I don't know if that looks more natural or less natural, but that looks like a pretty straight edge to a cup. Perhaps it was even, this looks like definitely someplace that a doctored wall, doctored tray. Remember, any of these items you could put on the table and photograph again. It's interesting. Now here's another thing I noticed. Somebody seemed to think that this was the leash tied around the bench. I don't think so. That looks like a portfolio to me. That looks like Ghislaine Maxwell is sitting on a folder or something. Perhaps there are documents in there. I don't know that anyone's been talking about that, but this is, again, another area where that bench has been edited to some extent. Our on-the-scene photographer is helpful once again in that we get a bit more information about this confusing edit. It seems that stone, gravelly looking piece is coming from the trash can. So that's, further information that this trash can was definitely edited out of the image, but I just don't think that it was edited out to do away with the trash can. This looks like a portfolio that she's sitting on, and I think that that trash can is edited out to facilitate the insertion of this car. We spoke in the earlier video about how this top section shows some signs of potentially being added. Now, this reflection on the window is skillfully done if this has been added in the way that I described, because it does indeed look like we're looking through the window of this car. We can see Nissan cars in the background there, which is what I would expect to have parked in the Nissan parking lot. So this is an interesting image. Where did it come from? Who is Mega? What is Maxwell sitting on? Has this bench been edited to remove a tray? Has this area of the image been edited to cover up something that they don't want us to see? We've got soft focus over here. We've got a curvature to this bench that doesn't seem to match the way the bench actually should look. That's weird. These look like signs of Photoshop editing to me. So the final thing I wanted to talk about in the video for today is the jewelry that is worn by Maxwell that hasn't really been discussed. Let's go back to one of the original photos of her here. You'll notice that these photos that came from the New York Post content management system are called Maxwell Final 1, Maxwell Final 2, and Maxwell Final 3. Now, I don't think we can draw any conclusions from that, but it's a habit that I noticed that digital artists have. When they think something's done, they name it final. When I was running 21st Century 3D and would direct artists, there would be a tendency for them to call things final, and I would snap when I saw that, because then I'd get Final 1, Final 2, Final 2A, Final 2B with motion blur. So using the word final seems to me like somebody's editing the document. This is interesting to note. This looks like an iPhone that's receiving text messages. So are they communicating with someone as far as staging this photo shoot goes? And we've got these rings. Maxwell is wearing these very unusual looking rings. And if we are to believe that everything that she's doing in this photo has a reason, then there's a reason why she's wearing those rings. In this high resolution image, we can see very clearly this does look like a phone. It looks like it might be an iPhone with some sort of extended battery pack case on it. I know Apple makes a case that has an extended battery pack. That might be it. So there's two phones. This looks like somebody's keys or something on a necklace or a lanyard or something like that. We've spoken about the two drinks. And the New York Post covers the second tray. This photograph, other versions of this photograph that we have a second tray. This photo shows the second tray, but it's much lower resolution. Where did this come from? It's interesting. And do we see some blemishes and things on Maxwell's face that aren't apparent in some of the higher res versions? Hard to say. It looks about the same. Well, those are the questions that remain for me. I don't know exactly what's going on in these pictures, but hopefully people will see this and we can get some more information. You know, it's always about putting this information out there and having the crowdsource process take hold. If there's anybody who lives in Universal City, who knows anybody who lives in Universal City, who goes to that In-N-Out Burger, surely these three people sitting in the background have got to be aware that their pictures were in the New York Post, I'd be curious to know what they observed. Did they see a lawyer taking a picture with a Canon camera with a big lens? That's going to be obvious to anyone who I think seeing someone with a camera like that today sort of stands out because most people are just taking pictures with their phone. So I think you'd notice a person there at the In-N-Out Burger snapping a picture of her. And it seems obvious that the original story was obviously a lie. A lot of strange things going on in this image. I'd still like to know who put this out there, why they put it out there, what the purpose is. You know, it occurred to me that if you're Jeffrey Epstein, you got to know that all these people you're blackmailing are going to want to kill you, and it's certainly illegal. So it stands to reason that he would have a plan for dissuading people from wanting to murder him. I would presume that people know that if anything happens to Epstein, this information is coming out. That may also be something that would protect him in jail. And I mean, there's a lot of powerful people who might be motivated to do what Jeffrey Epstein says if him dying would release damaging information. I mean, I'm talking about Prince Andrew, I'm talking about Bill Clinton, I'm talking about Ehud Barak. I think any one of those men could orchestrate and finance some sort of clandestine operation to sneak Epstein out of jail, make it look like he's dead, release this steganographic message to whoever it's being released to. But I just become very curious when people tell me or the viewers of Crowdsource the Truth not to look at something. Why would they care? There's certainly enough news outlets and more than enough YouTube channels that if you don't want to look at what I'm looking at, just turn it off. But when people tell me and the viewers of Crowdsource the Truth not to look at something, I think that might be a hint that we need to look at it some more. So I hope that people enjoyed this broadcast. I hope that people will go over to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Sponsor the show. Can't keep these programs coming without your sponsorship. We all know that Google and YouTube are demonetizing videos. They're doing things to blacklist videos. So the best thing that you can do is become a sponsor. Get onto Patreon or Subscribestar. Share this video with your friends and tell everybody about Crowdsource the Truth. Thanks for watching, everybody. And don't miss tomorrow, Sunday with Charles at 3 p.m. We're going to be further exploring the mysteries of Epstein's Island with Charles Ortel. I'll see everybody at 3 tomorrow.